I do have to acknowledge my aunt, Ginger, who's my dad's sister, and her husband, Dick, are here, and I got little hints from them. Talk into the microphone, so I'm doing that for you. Otherwise, Auntie, I'd do more like you and walk around. So, anyway, I'm not used to standing still. I do think I get that from my dad, too. So anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about is just kind of who I am. As Elias said, I graduated from here in 1982. I then did a year at Northwestern, and after that, I went to Hewitt Associates, which is now A.M. Hewitt. Pretty boring. Not much there. Iowa was great, but then I really haven't done much since then. So I thought, what little facts can I weave in? Well, I actually, even though I said I went 4 years here, I actually spent 13 years at the University of Iowa. Well, I'm from Iowa City. I actually went to the university preschool, and then I did K through 6th at the University of Elementary School, and then 4 years at Iowa. So that gets me to 13. Now, I do have to acknowledge the first 2 of those do not exist anymore. One is a nice building over near Burge Hall, and then University Elementary School is over in North Hall. So they have disappeared. The other thing, when you're from Iowa City, there's a lot about Hawkeyes. So I actually was a baby Hawklet and a little Hawk before I became a Hawkeye. Now, the baby Hawklets was Central Junior High. Another thing no longer in existence. I have a really bad track record, but luckily for all of you, it stopped there. And then probably for this group, my greatest claim to fame is I am Bob Hogg's daughter. So, as you know, if you're here celebrating the 50 years of the department, you probably know my dad or have heard of my dad. He was a fixture here. In fact, my dad was on faculty for 50 plus years at the university. And I'll never forget, at one point he starts talking about it. He goes, there's a guy, and Mary, correct me, or Rob, Alan, there's a guy over in the power plant that's actually been here longer than me. And I don't know, so he was like number 2, and I don't know if he ever got the number 1 spot here for longest service at the University of Iowa. But he was clearly here, he was clearly a fixture. But more so, he really was a memorable person. If you knew my dad, he was a passionate teacher. He loved to teach. In fact, I was thinking about it, at one point, Facebook, the Alumni Association, had a little Facebook quiz, or just put a comment of who was your favorite professor at the University of Iowa. And Jay Holstein won. Jay Holstein, Department of Religion, everybody answered him. He had some class, I don't remember exactly the name of it, but it was Religion in Society or something that everyone loved, almost every undergrad took. I didn't know, so I'd remember the name of it. And Jay Holstein won out. When you actually looked through the responses, which of course I did, there were actually a handful for Dad. Which, if we threw out Jay Holstein's responses, I think he got the number 2 spot on the most mentions, which given he didn't teach a class that was for your average undergrad, is actually pretty remarkable by itself. So very passionate teacher, very concerned about the individual, and we've heard a few stories today about that. And I have to say, he passed away in December, and one of the things that just really touches our hearts are the number of people that have written us or said something about something my dad did, that he went out of his way to help someone that really, truly changed their life. Put their life on a different path, because he cared about the individual like you wouldn't believe. And maybe the third thing, potentially the thing he's most known for, is he loved to have fun and tell jokes. I mean, he really liked to tell and retell jokes. I once got convinced being a teacher was the perfect profession for my dad because he had a captive audience that it was in their benefit to laugh at his jokes. I mean, no questions asked. In fact, he had a joke he's probably most famous for, the x squared over 2 joke. How many people heard him with the x squared over 2 joke?
How many times?
I'm not asking how many times, just did you hear it? And quite honestly, if you didn't raise your hand, my guess is you never met my dad. because I had to laugh. He told this joke so many times that my son, who is now a freshman in college, I'll never forget, last year when he was a senior in high school taking calculus, he had heard this joke many, 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 many times. And he finally declares one night, "Mom, I finally get the joke." But he knew the joke so well, he didn't, that's what it took. So anyway, Dan is great, and one of the things he was also infamous, or famous for, maybe infamous, but famous for, is giving advice. And that's where he did give me some of that fatherly advice that you always have to appreciate. I remember when I was coming off to I am a University of Iowa actuary, proud of it, so I'm proud to follow two other great University of Iowa actuaries in talking. He, when I was coming to the University of Iowa, he said, Dad, I'm kind of good at math, and I kind of like the idea of going into business. Maybe I'll become an accountant. He took me aside with that fatherly advice and said, Barb, be an actuary. I had no idea what an actuary was. He goes, you'll make more money and you'll open more doors than you will as an accountant. I said, okay, I did it. I still had no idea what I was getting into, but I did it. Now, he did, it was even as I was thinking about the 50th anniversary, and Dad was chairman of the department at the time, I now am wondering, did he have ulterior motives that upped his enrollments? I'm still not sure. I wasn't looking out for my best interest or his. But the other thing, Andy already pointed this out, there are a lot of job studies that talk about what's the best job. Here's one that has actuary number one. But I want to point out number 4 is statistician. And I want to say this might be the one time I beat my dad in something. So I was kind of excited about that. Being an actuary from Iowa, though, is also really exciting because the influence that the university has on the actuarial profession. As I mentioned, I went to Hewitt Associates, and I've kind of been there ever since. But I'll never forget, about 2 years after I started at Hewitt, at the time now Ann Hewitt, so I've got to be careful what I call it, but they put together a book on the history of Hewitt Associates. And what they wanted to do, it was a partnership, it was a very caring company, and what they wanted to do was capture the history, because they've been around a while before they didn't have it anymore. And they put together this book. So Dad was in to visit me one day, and I said, hey Dad, you might get kicked. Is this like echoing weird? Are you guys okay? Should I back up more? Is it okay? Okay. I said, Dad, you might get a kick out of this. And probably, he started reading it, and within a page or two, he's going down memory lane. Now, I hadn't actually read it when I gave it to him, so I didn't know what he was doing. But by page 5, and there were a couple pages, table of contents, things like this, he's reading along and saw all his connections. So Hewitt started as a brokerage firm, like a small, little, teeny, couple people brokerage firm in 1940. By the mid-1940s, they decided, maybe being a broker isn't the thing. We want to be an independent consultant. And we want to be an independent actuarial organization. So what did they do? They came to the University of Iowa, talked to Lloyd Noller. Lloyd actually worked there a few summers, and he set them up with some of their first actuarial students. Now this firm that started as Hewitt, made that decision, came to Iowa to get their actuaries, is now what really the basis for A&N Hewitt, which is 30,000 employees across 90 different companies, but with a heavy, heavy foundation here. And I thought that's important to let you know that. But I'd say even beyond this, being an actuary really is cool. Being an actuary from Iowa is cool, but it has influence beyond just Iowa actuaries. So as Dad passed away, I work, I'm in an actuarial group, I work with a lot of folks. I actually got to work with Gordon a long time ago when he was there. But a lot of folks, when he passed away, they came up to me and said, oh, I still have Hogg and Craig on my desk. I look at it every day, or I've got Hogg and Tanis. Or my favorite was the people that would come up to me and say, when I was recruited to Hewitt, they told me the daughter of Hogg and Craig worked here, and they said that was a selling point. Now I have to say, I don't know if my mother would appreciate that, but anyway, that was one of their selling points, is the daughter of Hogg and Craig worked here. So as I was coming here, I did ask a few of our Iowa actuaries, just their memories of Iowa. Bob Bernsey, he still works at Hewitt. He just celebrated his 40 years at Hewitt. Gordon probably remembers him.
Oh, yeah.
And the interesting thing about Bob is he now has the longest seniority, so he's kind of following in Dad's footsteps. He's got the longest seniority at anyone at the company, at least from the old Hewitt side. But he tells me, when I work with him, still tells me stories about Lloyd Noller. One of his is up here, which says, he'll imitate Lloyd Noller too. Mr. Bernsey, I don't know what university you are referencing, but there is no University of Iowa. I'm professor of the State University of Iowa. Now Bob forgets the state part, so I added that because I'm pretty sure that's what Lloyd would have said. So, a lot of good stories. Well, the thing is, Dad had the perfect job. So while actuary got number 1, statistician got number 4, for my dad, it was the reverse. He loved his job. He's actually made it probably hard for the 4 kids to find that job. You can love as much as he loved. He loved Iowa. He loved teaching, and he loved statistics. It was perfect. In fact, when he retired, I think we all sort of said, oh my gosh, if Dad retires, what's he going to do? Because he left Iowa, left teaching, and he still stayed involved in statistics, but it's not as much. And in fact, though, to some extent, Dad would even say he failed retirement, because I think Jim Profit got him to come back and be a visiting professor one semester, which I think he really enjoyed, because he did miss it so much. So while my father spent 50 years at the University of Iowa, I'm not kind of transitioning, watch how I do this. So while my dad spent 50 years at the University of Iowa and had the perfect job, there's an awful lot of people in this world that can't do that. So what I do now is I really focus on retirement issues, and I work with large employers who deal with retirement. And so I'm really conscious of that fire alarm, so I'm trying to move fast. And I talk fast, which I'll probably be done early with that. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about just the state of retirement and what's going on. So one of the things that we do at ANQ, we have a lot of data. I don't know if we have big data, but we actually do have big data. We have a lot of data. And one of the things we like to do is look at what do people need to retire. So one of the analyses we do, we actually have data on 2.2 million people. We run through this model, and we basically say, how much does someone need to have enough money to retire? So we project out to retirement, we factor in all kinds of things, we adjust. We say they have to maintain their standard of living, so we'll take away a few things they don't need, but we'll add medical, because it gets more expensive once you retire, and we'll do all this, project it out, figure out what's the present value they need at retirement to fund that. And then we compare that to what's the value of the Social Security they expect to receive at retirement. Aggregate this over 11 million people, or not 11, 2 million people, and find the average person retiring at age 65, net of Social Security, should have 11 times their pay at retirement saved up in order to afford retirement. So that's what you have to have through your own plans, from your own savings, employer plans, things like that, 11 times pay. Now, that's an average number, I know that, but it does tell you a pretty big story. That's a big number, right? And a lot of people aren't ready for that. In fact, in our study, we do this comparison, and we look at how much people have, and then we actually take a segment of this and look at how much are they projected to have in retirement if they stay with their company. And we only look at people contributing to their plan. So we're kind of self-selecting to a best case scenario. We're looking at large employers, that's a leg up right there. We're looking at people who will have a full career, people move around and the money doesn't necessarily stay for retirement. And we're looking at people who are already saving in the plan. So this is the best case scenario, and we find 30% of people are on track to have enough money at retirement. So when I've got a best case scenario and the number's only 30%, That actually is a little alarming, isn't it? And there's another 15% or so that if they adjust, they'll probably be about somewhere between up to 2 times pay short at retirement. And you can argue, okay, if you're down to, if you have 9 times pay rather than 11 times pay, maybe you can adjust your lifestyle. You'll still be okay, but we're still less than half that best case scenario. So, one of the other things though I just wanted to acknowledge, those are averages. So what happens if someone lives longer? Those are averages assuming a median life expectancy, and you guys all know what a median is. There are people that live longer than that, right? Like half the people live longer. So we also said, what happens if you go to the 80th percentile? And the number bumps up tremendously to 13.6. So if it was 11, now it's 13.6 if I change that variable. So you can start seeing when people have to self-insure their longevity, that's a pretty big deal. Because they don't know how long they're going to live, right? Another what if. How does this vary based on generation? The fact of the matter is that the baby boomers have it best. They need about 10 times their pay. Gen Xers need 11 times pay. And millennials need 12 times their pay. Why is it getting higher for millennials? Well, longevity is working in their favor. The downside of longevity, though, is you got to save more if you want to retire. And these are all assuming retirement at age 65. But anyway, that's the story there. Millennials get hit by longevity in a good way. That's a good thing. But also medical costs are projected to increase pretty tremendously. And so we factor that in. And that takes a bigger bite for the millennials. So we looked at how do people choose? What are their choices that get them there? So if I need to get to 11 times pay by the time I'm 65 and I start saving at 25, that means I need to save 15% of pay each year for my entire career. That's a lot of savings. And the fact is, I looked at some other data we have that says for Fortune 500 companies, the average value of retirement benefits is about 6 times pay, 6% of pay, not 6 times, 6%. So if you're lucky enough to be at a Fortune 500 company getting a value of 6% of your pay, you still need to be saving 9 times your pay. So that's a pretty big number, and it also says why so many people are falling short. If I wait, you guys are a bunch of mathematicians, you understand? If I wait, the number gets bigger, if I still want to retire at the same age. Another factor is investments. How do you invest? So the question is, if I get better returns on my investment, it makes a huge difference, right? If I do less returns, it's a big problem. And that's kind of what one side of this page says. But the other thing that was really interesting is we're seeing a lot of things emerging in the financial markets that are meant to help people make good, age-appropriate investment decisions. Now most people now are in a savings plan and have choices of how to invest. You folks on faculty here have TIAA craft, you get to choose. But what we're finding is most people don't make good decisions when left on their own. So what we've seen is this emergence of tools, certain kind of investment funds that if you just put it all in there, it gives you the age-appropriate mix of investments, and it actually changes over time. And what we found in a study we did with an organization called Financial Engines is when people use those tools or these investment funds that are specifically designed to get you the right investment mix, their average return, or their return on average, was 3% higher annually over those that didn't do it, which says there's an awful lot of not great investment decisions happening if people are left to their own devices. Deciding when to retire. Again, rather intuitive if you think about it. The numbers are scary though. 11 times pay was at age 65. If I want to go out at age 62, no surprise, I need more. I got more years to fund, less years to to save for it, 13.5. If I wait to 67, the number goes down to 9.4. So you can see huge decisions people need to make that will have a major impact on how comfortably they live at retirement. So, time out. I'm going to go to a couple other actuaries. I showed Bob Birdsey. Here's a couple master's students from the 2008 and 2009, Ryan Potter and Billy, who both gave a lot of credit to the University of Iowa and what they learned here, the experiences they got that helped them along. I'm going fast, scared of a fire drill. Kelly Kriegel, out there in her Iowa Hawkeye gear, loving the fact she's a Hawkeye, finding Iowa Hawkeyes around the world as she travels, and very happy to have a lot of Iowa colleagues, both at Aon and around the actuarial profession. So one other thing I was just going to quickly cover is, I talked about what you need, but then let's look at what's really happening. Just a few slides on this. One, Andy talked about Society of Actuaries. One of the things is they do a lot of research. In 2013, they did a series of focus groups out talking to current retirees. And one of the questions that was asked, it's really trying to get into, it's sponsored by a Retirement Needs and Risk Committee, and one of the things they're trying to get at is, what are people actually thinking when they retire? And so their question was, why did you retire? And probably the interesting thing from those focus groups, it wasn't because I carefully planned it. It was health issues made me retire. Workplace challenges, meaning they didn't force me out because that would be illegal, but I just wasn't thinking I should stay at work anymore. So workplace challenges, or caring for family. So things that are sort of not those planful things are the reason they retire, which is why the preparation becomes so important. And this is validated by other studies where they do look at what was their expected retirement age versus what their actual retirement age. And expected is like 67 or something like that, and the actual turns out to be 62. There's a pretty broad gap in terms of that. Those same focus groups looked at how are you managing financial decisions. And the fact of the matter is it's a little haphazard. Most people take Social Security at age 62, and there's a lot of studies that say that may not be in their best interest. I mean, again, it's an individual decision. There's a lot that goes into it. But there are studies that show deferring Social Security can be one of the best ways to purchase an annuity. And so that's something that's counterintuitive. A lot of people, they're like, I want to make sure I got my Social Security. I'm going to start as soon as possible. Capital preservation drives their investment decisions. They don't have a strategy for a systematic drawdown. And they're trying to be careful with their expenses. So that's how they manage retirement. They don't really plan beyond a fairly short-term time horizon. They aren't thinking about longevity risk. And I think we even mentioned a few of those things earlier. They aren't thinking in the future. They aren't projecting those things. And maybe even one of the more untroubling things, there's a lot of troubling things I talked about, but they also see a financial advisor is the same as a financial planner. Meaning your broker who makes money by changing your investments is my financial planner thinking about my best interest. And there's no discrimination between those two things for these folks. Another study, I was interested that actually the Insured Retirement Institute just came out, I just saw it a couple weeks ago, so I thought I'd throw it in here. They were looking at boomers. Again, it was a whole analysis of baby boomers, and this is working baby boomers. And they were asked 3 questions. Are you saving for retirement? Only 70% said yes. So there's 30% of people that are baby boomer category, which means you have to be in your 50s by now, that haven't saved for retirement. Have you saved enough to live comfortably during retirement? 30% said yes. Only 30%. Are you satisfied with your lives from an economic standpoint? Half of them said yes. So again, it's rather troubling when you look at these folks that are probably your next generation of retirees. They really aren't ready for this. And that was supported by the Employee Benefits Research Institute, releases some information where they go out and ask people how much you have saved. About a quarter of people have less than $1,000 of savings, and this is for people age 55 and older. So again, when they have to fund their retirement, they really aren't ready for it, and only